Kentucky basketball starting five is set, and it's not quite what some of you expected it to be.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be taking a look at some notes that CBS Sports insider Jon Rothstein has about Kentucky basketball. He went to take a look at a practice today, talked about their starting five, a couple of individual players that he wanted to highlight. We're going to dive into all of it on today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, first of all, thank you so much for tuning in. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are here. It's going to be a really, really fun month as we get closer to the season. And if you're listening on podcast, I would love it if you subscribe there as well. And regardless of wherever you're tuning in from today, I've got it on the notes here. If you're watching on YouTube, and I want you guys to go right now into the description, whether or not you are looking on podcast or on YouTube. At the top of the description, there will be a link to a Google form where I want you to predict Kentucky basketball's season. You can pick win-loss for every single game, and then there are questions at the end of who do you think is going to lead Kentucky in points per game, rebounds, assists, how far will Kentucky make it in the SEC and NCAA tournaments. I have loved the responses from you guys so far. I put this over on the community tab over on YouTube, as well as at Locked On UK on Twitter, but I want you guys to go right now. Fill this out. Let me know what your thoughts are about this season. It seems like there is a very interesting trend towards specific games, which of course we'll dive into. I'll show you guys the form once we get an adequate amount of responses. But a lot of you seem to be splitting 50-50 consistently on some games. A lot of you wholeheartedly agree we'll beat some teams that I think we may struggle with. So it's going to be really, really fun. Go click that link in the description. Go fill out that form. Should maybe take you 2-3 minutes. I would greatly appreciate it if you would do that. So according to Jon Rothstein, Kentucky basketball's starting five is set. Now we here at Locked On Kentucky have gone back and forth this entire offseason as to what Kentucky basketball's rotation is going to look like. Who is going to get the starting nod in the backcourt, I think, has been a major point of conversation. According to Jon Rothstein, this is his early prediction on Kentucky basketball's 2024-25 starting five. Lamont Butler will start at point guard. This is something some of you have continued to say. There's no way Koby Brea comes off the bench for Kentucky. There's no way they let Lamont Butler start. They need somebody offensively that's better, that can pass better, that can shoot better, blah, 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 blah. Yes, Koby Brea is a great individual player, but so is Lamont Butler, and we've seen throughout the course of this summer, Lamont Butler take this team and lead them. He has been a vocal leader on social media posts. He's talked about it in interviews, how he wants to be a leader. Mark Pope has said that Lamont Butler is a leader of this team. He's going to start at point guard, and he's going to be a good facilitator, and he's going to be a phenomenal defender. Now, unless things just completely fall apart here with Lamont Butler, efficiency-wise, maybe he turns the ball over too much, maybe he can't handle the pressure, who knows? Until that point, he is our PG1, and we are going to ride with him. Starting at point guard, according to Jon Rothstein, is Lamont Butler. Then you get to shooting guard. And this is something that I have gone back and forth on because I truly don't know where Pope is going to take this. Like, what direction do you take it? Because you have three different guys, I think, that could realistically start at shooting guard, like that are good enough to do so. And according to Jon Rothstein, I think you've got the most electric option here at shooting guard. And that's Koby Brea, the transfer from Dayton. I think objectively the best shooter in the country returning in college basketball this season. I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that. I think a lot of analysts would also agree Brea is just incredible and probably the top option. So because Brea is starting at shooting guard, what happens with the rest of the rotation? We'll get to that in a second. At small forward, I think this one's pretty cut and dry. I think he's going to start. I know that he was the sixth man of the year in the Big 12 a season ago. Jaxson Robinson, I think, is going to get the starting nod here at small forward. So does Jon Rothstein. What you do with that 3 spot, with that small forward position in your rotation is going to be really interesting to monitor as we go through the season, because to be honest with you, there are guys that can slide up or down to that position, but I don't necessarily know if you have a true 3 outside of Robinson. And then at the 4, we talked about him yesterday, and we're actually going to talk about him a little bit more here in just a little bit. Andrew Carr, projected to be the starting power forward for the Kentucky Wildcats. This does not shock anyone. I think he's going to be one of the better players on Kentucky's roster. And then you have at the 5, and if you remember earlier in the offseason, it might have been early August, CBS Sports put out a projected starting 5 for the Kentucky Wildcats, and they had Brandon Garrison starting at the 5 over Amari Williams. I love Brandon Garrison, and I have raved about how good of a player I think he's going to be. I think there's a good chance that, hey, man, he could be splitting time with Amari Williams at some point this season, instead of just coming off the bench and getting some minutes. He is that talented. He is special, and he's going to be an elite player for Kentucky in future seasons whenever he is the primary player and the star there at that position. But Amari Williams is going to start at the 5, I believe, for Kentucky, and Jon Rothstein says the same. So, again, your starting 5, Lamont Butler, Koby Brea, Jaxson Robinson, Andrew Carr, and Amari Williams. Kirk Carissa and Travis Perry, I think, will come off the bench at point guard. I think Travis can slide down to shooting guard, as can Lamont. Koby Brea starting at shooting guard. I think he can slide down to small forward. I think Otega Owe will come off the bench at shooting guard. He can also slide down to small forward. Colin Chandler, I think, will be a backup too. Jaxson Robinson will start at small forward, but I think he can slide down to the 4. Trent Noah will back him up there alongside Owe and Brea, depending on what the rotation looks like. Andrew Carr, I think, can slide down to center. Ainsley Almanor, I think, will be the backup 4. And then Brandon Garrison also could play center alongside Carr, as he is going to be the backup 5 to Amari Williams. So let's talk about some of the interesting notes that Jon Rothstein had about one particular player. According to Mark Pope, is the most efficient player for the Kentucky Wildcats right now, and it actually kind of surprises me. Before we get into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Roy. It's time to highlight my Roy Player of the Week. And Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. You can download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you'll be automatically entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. There's no purchase necessary. It's void where prohibited. And this week, I have selected Dane Key again because he went off against Ole Miss, had another 100-yard plus receiving game. I think he right now, alongside Brown, they form one of the better receiver duos in the entire country. Super fun to watch. He's got height, he's got speed, he can make contested catches. He has just been so consistent and so solid. I'm giving him $100 over on Roy, and if you were impressed with Dane Key's performance on Saturday, you can show him some love too. All you have to do is hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks, and if everyone pitches in $10 listening to this show, it adds up super, super fast for Dane Key. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for Key and his standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to do to build with the Wildcats this season. You can support the players, and you can change the game using Roy. So get off the sidelines and get into the NIL game with Roy. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. I really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Continuing our conversation here about some of the notes that Jon Rothstein had coming out of Kentucky basketball's practice. So we had here the starting 5 projection: Lamont Butler, Koby Brea, Jaxson Robinson, Andrew Carr, and Amari Williams. Mark Pope had some interesting comments to Rothstein about who he believes Kentucky's most efficient player is going to be. And this is the direct quote from Rothstein's tweet. Mark Pope tells me that Wake Forest transfer Andrew Carr has been Kentucky's most efficient player, going to be a major focal point at power forward. The Cat staff feels he can have a similar impact to Grant Nelson last season at Alabama. You look at the specifics, you look at the measurables, 6'9", 6'10", stretch 4, can shoot the 3, and can make an impact at the rim on both sides of the floor. I think the thing for me with Andrew Carr that I find so interesting is the fact that he is the most efficient. You're telling me that with a roster filled with Kerr Kriisa, Koby Brea, I think Jaxson Robinson's going to take a step forward efficiency-wise, Otega Oweh, Amari Williams, that Carr has been your most efficient player throughout practice. And we've heard some really, really good things about Kentucky shooting the basketball coming out of practice. So this is your most efficient player last season. 13.5 points per game while shooting 53% from the floor and 37% from beyond the arc. If Andrew Carr is going to have a Grant Nelson-like impact, he's going to have to do one thing that's very different than Grant Nelson, and that's shoot the 3 well, is actually stay consistent. Yes, I think that Andrew Carr can absolutely have a similar impact to Grant Nelson at Alabama from last season and heading into this season, frankly. But I think that Carr is going to operate just a little bit differently because I think that not only does he have to, but I also think he will be able to hit more consistently from beyond the arc. 37.1% as opposed to Grant Nelson, who shot, I think, sub 30% from 3 just a season ago. I expect him to shoot better, Nelson, this year, frankly, but I think that Carr has a little bit more going for him, at least in terms of probably possessions used for Kentucky this year. I think he'll be more of a focal point of the offense. I know that Alabama's got a couple of really big-time players in the backcourt, including Mark Sears, who is frankly going to demand a ton of touches. I think Kentucky's a little bit more balanced. That's not a hot take. So whatever happens in the backcourt, I think it's probably going to be more focused on distributing than anything. And I think players like Carr are going to get really heavily involved in the scoring game down the line. I know we already did an episode kind of previewing who we think could lead Kentucky in points per game. I think Andrew Carr is really an underrated part of that conversation. Because if he is Kentucky's most efficient player and he can bump up what he did around the rim a season ago, and he can continue to shoot 35, 36, 37% from 3, while also increasing his volume by a shot per game from beyond the arc, which I think is not only possible, but definitely I think it's the situation he's going to step into because Kentucky's going to play faster and they're going to ask more from him and from other players. He is also... I know that I'm kind of running off on a tangent here. If he's able to keep his efficiency with his volume, with more volume, I think he's going to be in an excellent position to average a lot of points per game. But I went back last night and I watched a ton of transfer portal videos highlighting Kentucky's transfer guys. Andrew Carr on corner threes shot like 25%. Now, he's a good spot-up player, and overall, he shot well from 3. But he was taking like 10% of his field goal attempts from the corner, and he was super inefficient in that area. Obviously, no player can be perfect, but the thing that I immediately thought about is the fact that during highlight videos this offseason, you've noticed that Carr is taking threes in transition from the corner. On top of this, even when they're not giving him the ball, he's still filling a lane and going to the corner waiting for a 3. You have to make sure that somebody with as interesting of a shot form as Carr's, you have to make sure that you're putting him in position to have the time to take the shot, and you give him the opportunities, and he's actually making the shot. 25% is not going to cut it if it's 10% of his field goal attempts and he's expected to step up from a volume perspective. It's just not a wise shot. You would want to put him in other positions. But if what Pope is saying is that Carr has taken a step forward efficiency-wise, and he's going to be a major focal point, I mean, I would expect him to be perfectly fine from beyond the arc. I mean, if you're at the end of the day, if you're shooting 37% from the floor, that's awesome. We can talk about individual tweaks from different spots, which honestly, nothing I can do about it. That's more of what the coaching staff can do for this kid. And as far as their schematics go, if they want to be the best offense that they can be, there's also the conversation of tendencies and how easy you are to scout at that point. You want to have more versatility, obviously, in your game. I'm getting off on a tangent here with Carr. What I'm trying to say here is that he's going to be good. That's the basic analysis of it. He's going to be really good. The staff is saying he's going to be good, and he's going to be efficient. If he keeps the numbers up like he had a season ago, I think nobody will be complaining about what Kentucky is doing at power forward. I'm also curious to see just how much Ainsley Almanor is used as we get closer and closer to the season. Does Jaxson Robinson play more power forward than him? I'm curious about that. So, all right, to wrap up the show, we've got stat of the show. And a number, and this is in relation to what Jon Rothstein has to say about another player on Kentucky's roster that may surprise. Before we wrap up the show talking about it, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is all over at FanDuel.com. You'll get started again with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Check that out over at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. We've talked about Carr. We've talked about the starting five. Let's talk about a player coming off the bench here with stat of the show. Actually, hold up. Before we get into that, I just want to remind you guys, if you didn't go do it a minute ago, whenever I was asking, go fill out that Google form. Go do it right now. Right now. I want to hear your thoughts on this season. I want to know what you think win-loss for every single game. And I want you to be honest about where you think Kentucky is going to finish in the SEC and NCAA tournament. And yes, for the non-believers out there, there are options on the poll or the forum where you can put, I don't think Kentucky's going to make the SEC tournament, or I don't think Kentucky's going to make the NCAA tournament, which I think one coincides with the other. So we'll be curious to see how many of you go halfsies on that. But anyway, go fill out the form. I would love to hear your responses, and we will be discussing those at length on the show here at some point in the near future. So, stat of the show, though. We've been doing this, I think this is the third or fourth time we've done this, where I give you a number, and we're going to dive into the importance of this number. It could be a basketball statistic, it could be a ranking, it could be a record. Today's number, statistic, is 33. Why 33? Well, some of you may be obsessing over this roster and their players as much as I have, and you may immediately know, hey, that's where Colin Chandler was ranked nationally coming out of high school. He was ranked number 33 overall. He's the number 6 combo guard. He's the number 1 player out of the state of Utah. I think some people are forgetting, and I haven't really talked about it enough on my show, I don't think. Some people are forgetting, hey, Colin Chandler is good. Guys, like Colin Chandler was a very good player coming out of high school. And this is what Jon Rothstein had to say on Twitter earlier coming out of practice. The surprise here at Kentucky practice has been freshman guard Colin Chandler. Former BYU commit, hasn't played in a bit due to a Mormon mission, but is really talented. Going to be in the Wildcats rotation. First of all, before we get to Chandler, I just want to say if that's true, I think that gives us some more information about how this rotation could work. So you have Lamont Butler, Kirk Risa at point. I think you have Travis Perry being a tweener between the 1 and the 2. I think he's going to play more than one than 2. I know a lot of you have said I think he's more effective off ball. I think he's also a great shooter, but we'll see what happens. I think I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying I think Kentucky has so many good options at the 2. They're going to play Perry at the 1 because he's a better distributor than some of these other guys, if that makes sense. Brea at starting shooting guard, then I think if Chandler is going to be a bit of a wild card, he's going to play more than we expect. Guys, he's the backup 2. Ortega is the backup 3, not a backup 2. Ortega played a little, actually, I think he primarily played small forward for the Sooners last year. You put him at the 3, you have Trent Noah as a depth piece at small forward, and this is what the rotation really looks like. If we're just going down, point, Butler, Carissa, Perry. 2, Brea, Chandler, Owe/Perry. 3, Robinson, Owe, Noah. And then the 4 and the 5, I think, are pretty straightforward and set. Actually, no, 4, you would have Carr, Robinson, Almanor, and then at the 5, you'd have Amari, Carr, Garrison. That's how I think this will go. That's just my guess. Some of you may agree, some of you may disagree, but Chandler, just to reiterate, he's not just some afterthought recruit. He's not just some random pickup. He was one of the first players that Kentucky ended up adding in this entire process with Pope. He is somebody that I raved about whenever we picked him up because he's got like great speed and he's got like burst. He's just got firepower on offense. He plays super hard. He's aggressive. He is attacking. He is scoring in a variety of ways. He's a really good shooter. He's solid at the rim as well. This is an underrated part of Mark Pope's first year is Colin Chandler. And I think, frankly, he's going to be a big part of what we do next season. I think he's going to be a really good shooting guard. Number 33 nationally, though. That's the stat of the show. Don't forget Colin Chandler was a bucket coming out of high school, and Jon Rothstein thinks he's going to be pretty good here as well. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_ and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.